The bathroom where the water never stopped running. When the police entered the bathroom, the water was still running. Not to wash away the blood, but as if something wanted the night to never end. The town of Jiaomei had always been described as quiet. Too quiet, some said. Tucked into the industrial outskirts of Zhangzhou, it was a place built for people who passed through rather than stayed. Factory workers. Temporary lives. Rooms rented by the month. Doors that closed easily, and neighbors who rarely asked questions. That night, the building did not scream. No shattered glass. No overturned furniture. No signs of panic. The corridor smelled of damp concrete and old detergent. A single light flickered above the stairwell, casting uneven shadows across doors that looked exactly the same. Inside one of those rooms, the bathroom door stood half open. The water poured relentlessly from the sink. It overflowed the basin, spread across the tiled floor, and carried with it a dark red stain that refused to dilute. Blood clung to the grout, to the walls, to the air itself. The metallic scent mixed with humidity and something far more unsettling. Stillness. The woman inside was young, naked. Her body was slumped against the wall beneath the sink, knees drawn inward as if trying to make herself smaller. Her head tilted forward unnaturally. The floor beneath her had turned slick, reflecting the harsh white light above. This was not a staged scene. It was not dramatic. It was intimate in a way that made seasoned investigators avert their eyes. Nothing in the room suggested chaos. The bed in the adjacent space was neatly made. Clothes were folded. Cosmetics aligned with deliberate care. A wallet lay untouched on the table. A phone rested beside it, silent. There were no signs of forced entry. No drawers pulled open. No evidence of a struggle spilling outward from the bathroom. This was not how crimes were supposed to look. According to the call log, the emergency report came shortly after 7:30 in the morning. The caller was a man. His voice broke repeatedly. He said his girlfriend was dead. He said he had just arrived. He said he did not understand what had happened. We have seen this pattern before. When a woman is killed in her own living space, suspicion gravitates toward familiarity, toward love, toward the person who knew her routines, her fears, her locks. And yet the room resisted that narrative. Water continued to run. Blood had already dried in places, indicating hours had passed. Time moved forward while no one intervened. While neighbors slept, while the city remained indifferent. There was one detail barely visible beneath a thin layer of dust on the bedroom floor. A partial footprint. Faint, circular patterns pressed gently into the grime. It did not belong to someone who had collapsed. It belonged to someone who had walked away. The room did not speak loudly. It whispered. And what it whispered suggested that the truth was waiting somewhere far darker than the bathroom where the water never stopped running. Nothing in that room suggested a struggle, except for what was waiting behind the bathroom door. The first officers arrived with the practiced urgency of men who had seen too much. Behind them came forensic technicians, a medical examiner, and investigators from the criminal division. Outside the rented building, the morning sun had already begun to burn off the thin fog that clung to Zhangzhou's outskirts. But inside, the air remained stale. Heavy, as if the walls had absorbed every secret exchanged in haste and every argument smothered before it could become public. The victim's room was on the second floor, part of a row of nearly identical rentals crowded together like stacked compartments. This was not a neighborhood designed for stability. It was designed for proximity, for cheap rent, For people who worked long shifts and returned only to sleep, doors opened and closed all day. Strangers drifted through stairwells without leaving names behind. That reality shaped the investigation immediately. High density. Low security. Too many faces, too few witnesses. The caller sat on the floor outside the room, his back against the wall, knees pulled close. His eyes were red, his hands trembling in a way that could be grief, fear, or something more complicated. He introduced himself as Wang Fei, a factory worker employed in Xiamen, roughly 30 kilometers away. He said the victim was his girlfriend, Shang Yu Meng. He had returned in the morning after a night shift. When she did not answer her phone, he came to check on her. When he entered, he saw the bathroom light on, the water running, and then he saw her. Investigators did not argue with his account in the hallway. They did not comfort him either. They did what professionals do. They observed. They separated emotion from procedure. They began to measure the room. The rental space was small, roughly 20 square meters, divided into a sleeping area and a cramped bathroom, with a minimal kitchen corner pressed against the wall. The crime scene was confined. That mattered. In enclosed spaces, violence leaves echoes. Scratches, broken objects, clothing torn in panic, signs that the body fought to remain alive. But this room was unnervingly composed. The bed was made, the blanket folded with care. Toiletries and cosmetics were aligned on a small table as if someone had placed them deliberately only hours earlier. A wallet was visible. So was a phone. Neither appeared disturbed. There was no overturned chair. No scattered belongings. No drawer yanked open by desperate hands. It was a contradiction that forced the investigators to adjust their first assumptions. Robbery did not fit. If someone had entered for money, the room would have been stripped of order. If someone had attacked in rage, the space outside the bathroom would have carried more damage. If someone had staged the scene, there would have been signs of performance. But there was only a calm surface. And beneath it, a concentrated brutality confined to tile and water. They began where they always begin. The body. The medical examiner documented the victim's posture and injuries without dramatizing them. The wounds were concentrated around the neck, chest, and abdomen, consistent with a sharp weapon, likely a single-edged blade. The fatal injury was to the neck. Massive blood loss. Death, according to preliminary assessment, would have come quickly within minutes. The estimated time of death fell in the late evening of the previous night, in the window between 10 and 10:30. That detail mattered. It meant she had been dead for hours before the morning call. Hours during which the water kept running. Hours during which the building slept. In the bathroom, there were indicators of struggle. Blood patterns on the lower portion of the wall, suggesting the victim had been attacked while seated, kneeling, or collapsing. The absence of clothing raised a likely scenario. She had been showering or preparing to shower. The running water, the bathroom light, the intimacy of the space all pointed to a moment of vulnerability that was not accidental. And still, outside the bathroom, the room maintained its unnatural composure. Forensic technicians moved methodically through the sleeping area, lights angled low, searching for what the eye missed. Near the foot of the bed, they found a pillow on the floor. The fabric held smeared blood, not in a spray pattern, but in a dragged, wiped shape. The implication was immediate. Someone had used it to clean. Not thoroughly, not carefully, but with intent. Then came the smaller details that often decide cases. Drops of blood on the bedroom floor. Not splattered, not chaotic. Round, controlled, as if the bleeding person stood still or moved slowly. The drops were too far from the bathroom to be explained by the victim's final collapse. That raised a possibility investigators never ignore. The offender might have been injured during the attack. The room, despite its apparent calm, was beginning to confess. The door and windows showed no signs of forced entry. That narrowed the suspect pool. Someone was let in. Someone had access. Someone was trusted, or at least familiar enough to enter without violence at the threshold. In cases like this, the investigation almost always turns inward before it turns outward. The boyfriend. The partner. The person whose absence requires verification and whose grief requires scrutiny. Wang Fei understood that instinct. He did not have to be told. When officers escorted him for questioning, his shoulders tightened, as if he had been waiting for the accusation to arrive. And yet the physical evidence in the room remained stubborn. The untouched wallet. The untouched phone. The absence of ransacking. The wiped pillow. The controlled blood drops. The faint dust imprint. In the dim lighting of the bedroom floor, technicians photographed the partial footprint again. Circular tread patterns. A cheap shoe, perhaps. A shape pressed into dust like a signature left by someone who believed no one would look closely enough to notice. We often imagine violence as loud. We imagine chaos. But some crimes unfold with a terrifying economy. A door opens. A blade flashes. Water runs. And when it ends, the room looks almost peaceful. Almost. Because peace does not leave blood on a pillow. Peace does not leave controlled drops across a floor. Peace does not walk away. The blood on the floor did not belong to someone who was dying. It belonged to someone who was leaving. The interrogation room was deliberately plain. Gray walls. A metal table. 2 chairs positioned at an angle that discouraged comfort. Wang Fei sat with his hands folded tightly in his lap, staring at a spot just beyond the investigator's shoulders. He did not ask how long the questioning would last. He did not ask what evidence they had. His silence carried the weight of someone who already understood the rules of this space. Investigators began where they always do. Timeline. Relationship. Motive. Wang Fei explained that he and Zhang Yumeng had met the previous year. Both were migrants. Both were alone. She worked at a massage parlor. He worked night shifts at a factory in Xiamen. They moved in together quickly, not out of romance alone, but out of necessity. Rent was cheaper when shared. Loneliness was easier to manage when divided. But the relationship, he admitted, had been under strain. His family disapproved of her work. They wanted stability. Respectability. A partner who fit neatly into expectations shaped by distance and tradition. Wang Fei said he had asked her more than once to change jobs. To find factory work. To live more quietly. She refused. She needed the income. She had a child in her hometown. Responsibility outweighed compromise. According to his account, the argument reached its peak on the afternoon before her death. Voices were raised. Accusations exchanged. He left in anger to begin his night shift. Before leaving, neither of them believed it would be the last time they spoke face to face. At approximately 7:30 that evening, Wang Fei called her. The call connected. Her voice sounded normal. She said she was watching television. She said she planned to shower. The call ended without hostility. That detail was documented carefully. Timestamps. Call duration. Tower data. Later that night, when he tried to reach her again, there was no answer. He said he felt uneasy. But he did not leave work. He could not. His shift ran through the night. He finished at dawn. He returned directly to the rental room. The investigators listened. They did not interrupt. They did not accuse. They allowed the narrative to unfold fully, because lies tend to fracture under their own weight when given enough space. Then they tested it. A team was dispatched to the factory in Xiamen. Surveillance footage was retrieved. Attendance logs were examined. Co-workers were interviewed. Every piece of data aligned with Wang Fei's statement. He arrived at work early. He remained on site throughout the night. He did not leave. He did not disappear. The distance alone made it impossible for him to commit the crime and return unnoticed. The room went quiet. In many investigations, this is the moment when frustration sets in. The most statistically likely suspect dissolves into an impossibility. The case does not collapse, but it loses its most convenient explanation. Investigators return to the evidence. If the person closest to her was not responsible, then access had come from elsewhere. Someone she recognized. Someone she did not fear. Someone who could knock on her door late at night and be invited inside without resistance. They began to expand outward. Zhang Yumeng's work put her in contact with many people. Clients. Acquaintances. Other migrants from her hometown. The line between professional and personal was not always rigid. Investigators mapped her social circle carefully, knowing that familiarity often breeds entitlement in those who feel overlooked by the world. Then a witness stepped forward. A man who lived across the hall reported returning home around 10:30 that night. As he passed Xiang Yu Meng's door, he noticed something unusual. The door was not fully closed. The room was dark, but the bathroom light was on. He could hear water running loudly. He assumed she was showering. He did not call out. He did not look inside. In a building like that, privacy was an unspoken agreement. He continued to his room. The time aligned precisely with the estimated window of death. That detail shifted the investigation again. It suggested proximity. It suggested that the offender had either just left or was still inside when the witness passed. It suggested a level of audacity that was difficult to ignore. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage from nearby cameras. Most of the images were grainy, faces blurred by distance and low light. But one recording stood out. At 21:37, a man entered the residential area. Thin build, short sleeves, head lowered. His pace was quick. He appeared aware of the cameras without looking directly at them. At 22:27, the same man exited the area. Something had changed. When he entered, he wore socks. When he left, he did not. His movements were tense. His hand came up repeatedly toward his face as if hiding something or wiping sweat. The time span matched the duration of the crime. The footage did not provide a name, but it provided a direction. Investigators showed the recording to Wang Fei. He watched in silence, his expression tightening as the clip looped. Then he spoke a name hesitantly. A man from Xiang Yumeng's hometown. Someone who visited occasionally. Someone who struggled with gambling. Someone who often asked for money. Dao Xiaofeng. Background checks revealed a familiar pattern. Debt. Instability. Temporary work. Disappearing for days at a time. His phone was off. His rented room was empty. The absence itself became an answer. As the search intensified, reports surfaced of a man matching his description wandering nearby villages. Asking for work. Wearing a bandage on his left index finger. Calm. Unhurried. As if nothing had happened. The investigators understood then that this was not a crime born of planning. It was a crime born of collapse. And somewhere in the city, a man with nothing left was still walking freely, carrying the weight of a decision he could never undo. If the man closest to her did not do it, then someone else had been waiting for the door to open. The manhunt unfolded slowly, not because of a lack of effort, but because of the kind of terrain Dao Xiaofeng understood well. The outskirts of Zhangzhou were a patchwork of construction sites, temporary shelters, and informal labor zones where documentation was optional and anonymity was common. Men came and went without names. Work was paid in cash. Questions were discouraged. This was where people disappeared without crossing borders. Investigators tracked him through fragments. A security camera here. A witness there. A report of a man asking for work at a nursery. Another sighting at a paper factory. Each appearance suggested the same contradiction. He was not running. He was drifting. At the paper factory, an employee remembered him clearly. He had filled out an application with shaky handwriting. He claimed to have lost his identification. He asked for any job that offered food and a place to sleep. As he wrote, the employee noticed his left index finger wrapped in a crude bandage. Blood had soaked through the gauze. He said it was an accident. The explanation did not convince anyone who understood knives. The injury aligned perfectly with what investigators had already suspected. The controlled blood drops in the bedroom. The smeared pillow. A blade used too forcefully. A hand cut not in defense but in excess. By the time a warrant was issued, Dao Xiaofeng had already moved again. Rain followed him. Autumn rain that soaked dirt roads and softened ground that had been dry for months. For most people, the weather was an inconvenience. For investigators, it became an advantage. Near a rural village on the edge of the hills, a camera captured him once more. He carried a black plastic bag and a woven sack slung over his shoulder. Bedding. Clothes. The essentials of a man preparing to settle somewhere he did not intend to leave soon. A motorcycle taxi driver later confirmed transporting him toward a construction zone near the mountains. Dao Xiaofeng said he had found work as a night guard. The direction was wrong. The story was rehearsed. Investigators understood then that the construction site was a decoy. The driver had not seen him enter. He had only heard him say he would. That distinction mattered. They widened the search area beyond the drop-off point. Forested paths. Brick kilns. Abandoned structures used by undocumented workers. Places where no one asked how long you planned to stay. On a muddy trail leading uphill, they found the imprint first. Circular tread patterns. Pressed deep into wet earth. Fresh. The same pattern, photographed in a dusty bedroom days earlier, now pointed forward, away from the city. The ground itself confirmed what no witness could say with certainty. They followed the prints for nearly 2 kilometers until they reached an old brick kiln hidden in a shallow valley. Smoke drifted lazily from a makeshift cooking area behind the structure. Someone was inside. Investigators did not rush in. They approached quietly, posing as buyers, as travelers, as men looking for discarded materials. When they asked about a new worker, the kiln manager gestured toward a small shack behind the furnace. He said the man had arrived 2 days earlier. No papers. No demands. He only wanted food and shelter. The timing was precise. As the sun began to set, officers encircled the shack. Two moved to the door. Inside, a man stood over a small stove, chopping vegetables with a kitchen knife. His back was turned. His posture was tense, but not alert. When his name was called, he froze. Dao Xiaofeng turned slowly. His face was hollow. His eyes were sunken from sleeplessness. Before he could reach for the knife, he was on the ground, pinned by practiced hands, metal cuffs closing around his wrists with a sound that ended 6 days of movement. He did not struggle. On his feet were worn canvas shoes, their soles packed with mud. The tread matched the scene. On his left hand, the bandage was still there. The wound beneath it had begun to fester. In his belongings, officers found the clothes he wore on the night of the murder. Dried blood darkened the fabric in places he had failed to clean. The evidence no longer whispered. It spoke plainly. At the station, Dao Xiaofeng did not deny what he had done. He spoke of gambling debts, of humiliation, of being laughed at when he asked for help. He said he only wanted to borrow money. He said he lost control when she refused, when she spoke with contempt, when the knife was already in his hand and retreat felt impossible. He described the moment in the bathroom without drama. The water running, the struggle, the blade slipping, his finger cut deeply, the panic afterward, washing blood from his hands while more blood fell to the floor, using a pillow to wipe what he could not erase, removing his socks to avoid leaving traces he did not realize were already there. He did not take her money. Not because he was merciful, because he was afraid. Because pain and shock had reduced his intentions to survival alone. Because once the line was crossed, nothing on the other side mattered except escape. The case closed cleanly after that. Evidence aligned. Confession recorded. Sentence delivered. But the room remained. The bathroom, where water once ran without stopping, did not forget what had happened inside it. Neither did the people who walked past its door every day, knowing that something ordinary had broken in a way it could never fully be repaired. Some crimes are solved by logic, others by patience. This one was solved by the simple truth that a man who has lost everything is often the most dangerous creature of all. He did not kill her to take her money. He killed her because he could not take back what he had become. What remained after the water stopped? The trial moved quickly. The evidence left no room for ambiguity. Surveillance footage. Physical traces. A confession delivered without resistance. Dao Xiaofeng stood before the court with his head lowered, not as a symbol of evil, but as a reminder of how easily ordinary lives fracture under pressure. The sentence was severe. It was expected. In the eyes of the law, the case was resolved. A life had been taken. A punishment was delivered. Balance, in its most technical sense, had been restored. But investigations do not end where verdicts are spoken. Shang Yu Meng's name faded from headlines within weeks. Her room was cleaned. The water was turned off. New tenants eventually moved into the building, carrying boxes through the same corridor where officers once stood in silence. The walls were repainted. The tiles replaced. Nothing visible remained. Nothing visible ever does. For Wang Fei, time moved forward without direction. He returned to work. He answered questions from relatives who wanted certainty he could not provide. He replayed that final phone call repeatedly, measuring every word, every pause, searching for something he might have missed. The kind of guilt that survives innocence is rarely acknowledged, but it lingers all the same. For the neighbors, the memory settled into caution. Doors locked more carefully. Glances held a moment longer. In places where people pass through rather than belong, trust is always conditional. And for the investigators, the case joined thousands of others in an archive. Filed, labeled, closed. Another example of how violence does not require ideology, ritual, or madness to exist. It only requires opportunity, resentment, and a moment where restraint fails. There was no possession in that bathroom. No curse. No unseen force guiding a hand. Only a man who had lost his family, his money, his dignity, and finally his ability to stop himself. We often search for monsters because monsters allow distance. They make horror feel rare, contained, separate from us. But this case offered no such comfort. The room where the water once ran without stopping was not haunted by spirits. It was haunted by a truth far less comforting. That under enough pressure, the line between desperation and destruction can dissolve quietly. Without warning, without spectacle. And when it does, the aftermath is not chaos. It is silence. Clean rooms, untouched wallets, and questions that arrive too late to change anything. Some places are remembered because something supernatural occurred there. Others are remembered because they revealed something about us that we would rather forget. Some places are not haunted by spirits. They are haunted by what people are capable of when no one is watching.